A poor girl works as maid in CEO's mansion. Unexpectedly, CEO's son stops her and calls her mommy. "Hi, my very beautiful, loyal, and greatest family. There are no words powerful enough to truly express what's in my heart right now. We've reached 19,000, and every single number is a heartbeat. Your heartbeat. This isn't just a milestone. This is a miracle, and that miracle is you. You held my hand when I was unseen. You lifted me when I felt weak. You stayed when things were quiet. You believed when I doubted. You made this dream breathe. Without your support, this moment would have never existed. I didn't build this alone. We built this together, brick by brick, soul by soul. You are not just followers. You are my family, my strength, my blessing. A prayer for your precious heart. May your days be wrapped in peace, your nights filled with rest. May every tear you've cried water the garden of your future joy. May your loyalty be rewarded with miracles, and may the same love you give to me return to you overflowing. Please, if you feel touched by this journey, if you're proud of what we've built together, write congratulations in the comments. It means everything to me. And don't forget to like, comment, and share, so this love can reach more beautiful hearts like yours. From Mr. Peter, with full eyes, a grateful heart, and a love that words can't contain, thank you. This is our victory. This is our story. The Taylor mansion loomed against the morning sky, its gleaming windows reflecting the sunlight like 1,000 watchful eyes. Rosie Peake stood at the wrought-iron gates, her heart hammering beneath her threadbare blouse as she clutched her worn leather purse. The grandeur before her made her modest appearance seem even more pitiful by comparison, but desperation had driven her here, to the doorstep of a man who didn't even know she existed. 7 years, she thought, tracing the delicate chain of the locket hidden beneath her collar. 7 years of searching, of dreaming, of remembering eyes the color of stormy skies and hands that had once caressed her with reverent tenderness. The security guard examined her credentials with suspicious eyes. "Miss Peake, for the housekeeping position," he confirmed, skepticism evident in his tone as he assessed her simple floral dress and scuffed shoes. "Yes," Rosie whispered, her voice steadier than her trembling hands. "Mrs. Winters is expecting me." As the gate swung open, Rosie fought the urge to turn and flee. The plan had seemed simple from a distance. Secure employment in Wendell Taylor's household, observe from afar, determine the right moment to reveal the truth. But standing on the threshold of his world, the enormity of what she was undertaking threatened to overwhelm her. "For Prince," she reminded herself, squaring her shoulders as she approached the imposing entrance. "For our son." Mrs. Winters, the head housekeeper, was a forbidding woman with steel-grey hair pulled into a severe bun and eyes that seemed to catalogue Rosie's every flaw. She led Rosie through the mansion with brisk efficiency, detailing duties and expectations in a monotone that suggested she'd given this tour more times than she cared to count. "Mr. Taylor rarely interacts with household staff," Mrs. Winters explained, as they traversed a corridor lined with priceless artwork. "You will be invisible, efficient, and above all, discreet. Any gossip about the family will result in immediate termination." Rosie nodded, fighting to focus on the housekeeper's words while her senses drank in every detail of Wendell's world. The house was impeccably decorated, but somehow cold, lacking the warmth that transformed a dwelling into a home. Crystal vases held perfect arrangements that looked as if no human hand had touched them. Everything gleamed with wealth and privilege. Yet beneath the perfection, Rosie sensed an emptiness that made her heart ache. "You'll begin in the East Wing," Mrs. Winters continued, leading her toward a sweeping staircase. "Master Prince's quarters are strictly—" A childish laugh interrupted her, bright and musical, echoing through the cavernous foyer. Rosie froze, her hand instinctively reaching for the locket as a small figure appeared at the top of the stairs. Time seemed to suspend as the boy paused in his descent, a toy airplane clutched in one hand. He couldn't have been more than 6 years old, with dark hair that fell across his forehead in a way that made Rosie's heart clench with recognition. But it was his eyes. Her eyes, the exact shade of sapphire blue that stared back at her from every mirror that made breathing suddenly impossible. "Prince," Mrs. Winters called, her tone shifting from professional to indulgent. "Where is Miss Camden? You know you're not supposed to run in the house." The boy ignored the housekeeper completely, his gaze locked on Rosie with an intensity that seemed impossible for one so young. The toy airplane slipped forgotten from his fingers, bouncing down several steps before coming to rest. "Prince," Mrs. Winters repeated more firmly. "This is Miss Peake, our new housekeeping staff. Now where is your mommy?" The word, whispered with such wonder and certainty, echoed in the sudden silence like a thunderclap. Mrs. Winters stiffened, her mouth opening in shock as Prince flew down the remaining stairs, his small legs carrying him with reckless speed toward Rosie. "Mommy!" he cried again, louder this time, his face transformed by joy as he launched himself the last few feet directly into Rosie's instinctively outstretched arms. The impact nearly knocked her backward, but some primal instinct kept her upright as small arms wrapped around her waist with desperate strength. The scent of him, soap and sunshine and something uniquely him, filled her senses as she stood frozen, afraid to move, afraid to breathe, afraid this moment might shatter like the dream it surely was. "Young man," Mrs. Winters sputtered, recovering her composure. "That is entirely inappropriate. Miss Peake is not—" "What's happening here?" The deep voice cut through the chaos like a blade, resonant with authority and something darker, more dangerous. Rosie didn't need to look up to know who had entered. Her body recognized him on some cellular level, responding with a rush of heat that brought color flooding to her cheeks. Wendell Taylor stood in the doorway to what appeared to be a study, his powerful frame outlined against mahogany panels. 7 years had refined him, added silver at his temples and lines of experience at the corners of his eyes, but they had done nothing to diminish the raw magnetism that had drawn her to him that stormy night so long ago. He wore authority, like a second skin, his tailored suit emphasizing broad shoulders and narrow hips, his stance conveying absolute confidence in his domain. Yet it was his eyes, storm grey and penetrating, that held Rosie immobile as he took in the scene before him, his son clinging to a stranger as if she were his salvation. "Daddy," Prince called, his voice vibrating with excitement against Rosie's stomach, where his face was pressed. "Look, I found her, I found Mommy!" The blood drained from Wendell's face, his expression shifting from confusion to something harder, colder, as his gaze locked with Rosie's. In that moment, she saw no recognition, no memory of the night that had bound them together, only suspicion and the beginning of anger. "Mrs. Winters," he said, his voice deceptively calm, "please take Prince to his rooms. Miss Camden will be relieved of her duties immediately for this lapse in supervision." "No!" Prince cried, tightening his grip on Rosie. "No, Daddy, she's my real mommy, like in your picture." A muscle ticked in Wendell's jaw as he approached, each step measured and deliberate. Up close, his presence was even more overwhelming, the subtle scent of his cologne, the heat radiating from his body, the sheer physical power contained in his controlled movements. "Prince," he said, gentler now as he knelt beside his son. "Miss Peake is new to our household. You've confused her with someone else." The boy shook his head with vehement denial. "No! She's the angel who saved you from the fire monster. I know her." Something flickered in Wendell's eyes then, a shadow of memory, quickly suppressed, before his expression hardened once more. He placed a hand on Prince's shoulder, firmly but kindly disengaging him from Rosie. Mrs. Winters will take you to the kitchen for a special treat while I speak with Miss Peake, he said, his tone brooking no argument despite its gentleness. We'll discuss this later, buddy, I promise. Prince allowed himself to be led away, though he kept turning back to look, at Rosie with absolute certainty shining in his eyes, her eyes. Don't leave, Mommy, he called as Mrs. Winters guided him toward a side door. Promise you won't disappear again. When they were alone, the silence between Rosie and Wendell grew thick with unspoken questions. He studied her with cold assessment, taking in her simple appearance with a gaze that missed nothing. My office, he finally said, gesturing toward the study he'd emerged from. Now. Rosie followed on legs that threatened to give way beneath her, her mind racing to adjust to this unexpected turn of events. How could Prince possibly recognize her? How could he know about the accident, the fire? She'd come prepared to observe from a distance, to choose her moment carefully, not to be thrust into direct confrontation within minutes of arrival. The study was exactly what she would have expected of Wendell, masculine and elegant, with leather-bound books lining shelves of dark wood and a massive desk that dominated the space. He closed the door behind them with a soft click that somehow sounded like a prison gate in the sudden silence. Sit, he commanded, indicating a chair across from his desk. Rosie complied, folding her trembling hands in her lap as Wendell circled to stand behind his desk, establishing the power dynamic with deliberate precision. He didn't sit, instead bracing his hands on the polished surface and leaning forward slightly, his posture reminiscent of a predator considering its prey. I don't know what game you're playing, he began, his voice a low, dangerous rumble, but involving my son is unacceptable. I'm not playing any game, Rosie replied, summoning strength she didn't know she possessed. I had no idea Prince would react that way. I've never met him before today, Wendell's eyes narrowed. Then how do you explain his reaction? A child doesn't call a complete stranger mommy without cause. I can't explain it, she admitted, meeting his gaze directly despite the way it made her heart race. Children sometimes form instant attachments based on resemblances or coaching, Wendell interjected, his voice hardening. Did someone put you up to this? Is this some kind of twisted scheme to extract money? Because I assure you, Miss Peake, you've chosen the wrong target. Indignation flared in Rosie's chest, momentarily eclipsing her anxiety. I'm here for a job, Mr. Taylor, a job that I desperately need. If I'd wanted to extract money, as you so charmingly put it, there are far more direct methods than applying to clean your toilets. Something like surprise flickered across Wendell's face at her spirited response. He straightened, studying her with renewed intensity, as if seeing her properly for the first time. There's something familiar about you, he said after a moment, his tone shifting from accusation to puzzlement. Have we met before? The question struck Rosie like a physical blow. 7 years of dreaming of this man, of carrying his child, of searching for him across cities and continents, and he asked if they'd met before with the casual interest one might show a vaguely familiar face at a social gathering. No. She lied, the word bitter on her tongue. I think I would remember meeting someone like you, Mr. Taylor. A shadow of irritation crossed his face at her tone, but before he could respond, a soft knock at the door interrupted them. Mrs. Winters entered. Without waiting for permission, her expression carefully neutral. Pardon the interruption, sir, but Prince is quite distressed. He's asking for Miss Peake. The housekeeper's disapproving glance made it clear what she thought of the situation. Wendell exhaled sharply through his nose, a muscle working in his jaw as he considered. Fine, he said after a moment. Miss Peake, you're reassigned effective immediately. You'll work directly with Prince until we get to the bottom of this attachment. Consider it a probationary position. Rosie's heart leapt at the thought of being close to her son, even as anxiety churned in her stomach at the intensity of Wendell's scrutiny. Yes, sir, she managed, striving for a professional tone despite the emotions threatening to overwhelm her. "And Miss Peake," he added as she rose to follow Mrs. Winters, his voice dropping to a register that sent shivers down her spine. "If I discover this is some kind of scheme, if you do anything to harm my son in any way, there is no corner of this earth where you could hide from me. Is that understood?" Rosie met his gaze steadily, allowing some of the truth she'd hidden to surface in her eyes. "I would never harm Prince," she said softly. "I would die first." Something in her tone, some absolute certainty that transcended the circumstances of their meeting, gave Wendell pause. For a heartbeat, something like recognition flickered in his storm-grey eyes, a connection that bypassed conscious thought and reached for deeper memories. The moment passed as quickly as it had come, leaving Wendell frowning slightly as if troubled by his own reaction. With a curt nod, he dismissed her, turning back to his desk in a clear signal that their conversation was over. As Rosie followed Mrs. Winters through the mansion toward the nursery wing, her mind raced with the implications of what had just occurred. She had come seeking employment, hoping for glimpses of the son she'd been forced to search for from afar, planning a careful revelation when the time was right. Instead, Prince had recognized her instantly, had called her mommy with absolute conviction, had mentioned both the accident and the photograph she hadn't known existed. And Wendell, cold, suspicious Wendell, so different from the passionate man she remembered, had felt something, some echo of recognition that troubled him even as he dismissed it. The carefully constructed plan had shattered into chaos within minutes of her arrival, leaving Rosie to navigate treacherous waters she hadn't anticipated. Yet beneath the fear and uncertainty, a small flame of hope kindled in her chest. Her son had known her, had run to her with love shining in his eyes. Her eyes. Whatever challenges lay ahead, that moment of recognition was worth everything she had endured to reach it. As Mrs. Winters led her toward the sound of childish sobbing, Rosie squared her shoulders and lifted her chin. She had survived 7 years of separation, of longing, of working 3 jobs while searching for the man who couldn't remember her face. She would survive whatever came next, whatever it took to reclaim the family that should have been hers. All along, for Prince, for Wendell, for the love that had burned between them on a stormy night 7 years ago, a love that had created the beautiful boy who had somehow known her despite never having seen her face. For the family they were always meant to be. Chapter 2, Burning Questions. Prince's bedroom suite was a child's paradise, with walls painted to resemble an underwater kingdom and custom furnishings shaped like pirate ships and sea creatures. Toys worth more than Rosie's entire apartment were arranged on custom shelves, while a small desk in the corner held educational materials suited for a child far beyond the average 6-year-old's abilities. All this wealth, this careful curation of a perfect childhood, and yet the boy himself sat huddled in the window seat, tears streaming down his cherubic face as he clutched a worn stuffed dolphin to his chest. "Prince," Mrs. Winters said with forced cheerfulness, "look who's come to see you." The transformation was instantaneous and heartbreaking. Prince's head snapped up, his tear-streaked face illuminated by pure joy as he saw Rosie standing in the doorway. Without hesitation, he launched himself across the room, colliding with her legs and wrapping his arms around her with a strength born of desperation. "You came back!" he cried, his voice muffled against her skirt. "I knew you wouldn't leave me again." Rosie's heart shattered at the naked need in his voice. How could she explain that she had never left him willingly? That she had searched for him from the moment she discovered Wendell's identity, only to find him married to another woman, living on another continent. "Mrs. Winters," she said softly, "could we have a moment alone?" The housekeeper's lips thinned with disapproval, but she nodded curtly. "I'll be right outside the door," she said, the implicit warning clear in her tone. "Prince, remember what Your father said about proper behavior. When the door closed behind her, Rosie knelt to Prince's level, finally, allowing herself to truly look at this miracle she had created. His features were a perfect blend of herself and Wendell, her eyes and mouth, Wendell's strong jawline and aristocratic nose, her golden skin tone with Wendell's thick, dark hair. "Prince," she began, unsure how to proceed without revealing much too soon. "Why did you call me Mommy? We've never met before." The boy regarded her with surprising intensity for one so young. "Yes, we have," he insisted. "In my dreams. You sing to me when I'm scared of the fire monster." A chill raced down Rosie's spine. The nightmares about fire had plagued her throughout her pregnancy and Prince's infancy, nightmares in which she relived, pulling Wendell from the burning car over and over. Could such things be passed from mother to child? Could some bond transcend physical separation? "That's a very special dream," she said carefully. "But dreams aren't always the same as real life." Prince shook his head with the absolute certainty only children possess. "You're the lady from Daddy's secret picture," he stated. "The one he keeps in his special drawer that I'm not supposed to open. You saved him from the fire monster, and then you had to go away. But you promised you'd come back someday." Rosie's breath caught in her throat. A picture? Wendell had a picture of her, and somehow Prince had found it, had recognized her from it, despite the fact that she'd never been formally photographed with Wendell. "Prince, sweetheart," she said, choosing her words with extreme care. "Your daddy and I need to talk about some grown-up things before we can explain everything to you. Can you be very brave and very patient while we sort things out?" The boy studied her face, seeming to search for something in her expression. Whatever he found must have satisfied him, because he nodded solemnly. "You won't leave again?" he asked, his small fingers clutching hers with surprising strength. "I'll try my very best to stay," she promised, unable to offer more certainty. In the face of Wendell's suspicion and the precariousness of her position, that seemed to satisfy him. Prince relaxed his death grip on her hand and even managed a smile. "I knew you'd find us," he whispered, as if sharing a precious secret. "I told Daddy you would, but he said it was just pretend." Before Rosie could respond, the door opened to reveal Wendell himself, his imposing frame filling the doorway as he surveyed the scene before him. His expression was carefully neutral, but Rosie could sense the tension radiating from him. The barely leashed power of a man unused to situations beyond his control. "Prince," he said, his deep voice gentler than Rosie had yet heard it, "it's time for your afternoon lessons. Miss Camden has been replaced with Mr. Peterson for today." "But Daddy," Prince began, a note of panic entering his voice as he tightened his grip on Rosie's hand. "No arguments," Wendell interrupted, his tone firm but not unkind. "Miss Peake and I need to have an important conversation. You'll see her at dinner." The promise of seeing her later was enough to placate Prince, who reluctantly released her hand. As he passed his father, he looked up with earnest eyes. "Don't be mad at Mommy," he said quietly. "It wasn't her fault the monsters made her go away." Something flickered in Wendell's expression. Confusion, frustration, and beneath it all, a haunting uncertainty. He placed a gentle hand on his son's shoulder, guiding him toward a stern-looking man waiting in the hallway. When they were alone, Wendell closed the door with deliberate care, the soft click somehow more intimidating than a slam would have been. He remained near the entrance, as if unwilling to fully enter the space Rosie occupied, and studied her with the calculating gaze of a man who had built an empire by assessing risks and opportunities. "You have exactly 5 minutes to explain yourself," he said, his voice deceptively calm. "And I suggest you make those minutes count, Miss Peake, because my patience is wearing dangerously thin." Rosie rose from her kneeling position, determined to face him on equal footing, despite the difference in their heights. "I have nothing to explain," she replied, lifting her chin. "I came here seeking employment, nothing more." Prince's reaction was as surprising to me as it was to you. Surprising. Wendell's laugh held no humor. "My son, who has never so much as spoken to strangers without prompting, throws himself at you and calls you Mommy. He references a photograph I keep in a locked drawer in my private study. He mentions details about an accident that no one outside my immediate circle knows about, and you expect me to believe this is all coincidence?" He crossed the room in 3 long strides, his presence suddenly overwhelming in its proximity. Rosie held her ground despite the urge to step back, to create distance between herself and the magnetic pull of his body. "Who are you, really?" he demanded, close enough now that she could see the flecks of silver in his storm-grey eyes, could feel the heat radiating from his tall frame. "What do you want from me?" "From my son?" The questions hung between them, charged with tension that transcended mere suspicion. This close, Rosie could see the fine lines at the corners of his eyes, the slight furrow between his brows that spoke of habitual concentration. She could smell his cologne, sandalwood and citrus, the same scent she'd committed to memory 7 years ago, and beneath it the unique male essence that had haunted her dreams for 7 long years. "My name is Rosie Peake," she answered, fighting to keep her voice steady despite the havoc his proximity wreaked on her senses. "I'm a former nursing student who needed employment. That's all." "Former nursing student," Wendell repeated, something shifting in his expression. He circled her slowly, his gaze a tangible weight on her skin. "Strange coincidence. The accident report mentioned that the person who pulled me from the wreckage had medical training, applied a tourniquet to my arm before disappearing into the night." Rosie's heart stuttered in her chest. He remembered that much at least, remembered being saved, if not the face of the woman who had saved him. "Many people have medical training," she replied, forcing herself to meet his gaze, despite the way it made her pulse race. "It's hardly unique to me." "Perhaps not," he conceded, completing his circle to stand before her once more. "But combined with my son's reaction, with the specific details he mentioned," he trailed off, studying her face with uncomfortable intensity. "There's something about you, Miss Peake, something that feels familiar." The admission, reluctant though it was, sent hope fluttering in Rosie's chest. She fought to keep it from showing on her face, aware that revealing too much too soon could destroy any chance of being believed. "Mr. Taylor," she said carefully, "I understand your suspicion. In your position, I would feel the same. But I assure you, I mean no harm to you or your son." Wendell's expression hardened once more. "Words are cheap, Miss Peake. Actions speak louder." "Then judge me by my actions," she challenged, surprising herself with her boldness. "Let me work with Prince as you suggested. Observe me. If you see anything that concerns you, dismiss me immediately. I'll leave without protest." For a long moment, Wendell said nothing, his expression unreadable as he considered her proposition. Rosie held her breath, knowing everything, her future, her relationship with her son, her chance to reclaim the love she'd lost, hung on his decision. "Very well," he finally said, his tone clipped. "You'll be assigned quarters in the family wing near Prince's rooms. Mrs. Winters will provide appropriate clothing and explain your duties. You will be with Prince during all waking hours when he's not in lessons or with me. You will be monitored at all times, and you will report directly to me each evening regarding his well-being and activities." The terms were both more generous and more restrictive than Rosie had dared hope for. Living in the family wing would place her in proximity to both Prince and Wendell, allowing opportunities to build relationships with both. But the constant monitoring, the nightly reports, they spoke of a distrust that would be difficult to overcome. "I accept," she said simply. Wendell nodded once, brisk and businesslike, as if they'd just concluded a minor corporate negotiation rather than arranged the care of his only child. "One more thing," he added, his voice dropping to a register that sent shivers down Rosie's spine. "My son believes you're his mother. I expect you to correct that misapprehension at the earliest opportunity." The demand, delivered with cold authority, struck Rosie like a physical blow. Deny her own child? Lie. To the boy who had somehow recognized her across time and space. "And if he doesn't believe me?" she asked, her voice barely audible. Something dangerous flickered in Wendell's eyes. "Then you will be creative, Miss Peake. Because the alternative, allowing him to continue in this delusion, is unacceptable." He moved toward the door, clearly considering the conversation concluded, but Rosie found herself unable to let him leave without asking the question that burned in her throat. "Mr. Taylor," she called softly, "the picture Prince mentioned, the one in your private drawer. May I ask what it is?" Wendell paused with his hand on the doorknob, his back to her, shoulders suddenly tense beneath his impeccable suit. For a moment, she thought he might ignore the question entirely. "A photograph taken outside the hospital after my accident," he finally said, his voice carefully neutral. "I'm in the foreground. In the background, partly obscured, is a woman walking away. The picture was taken by a reporter hoping for a statement about the crash." He half-turned, his profile sharp against the afternoon light streaming through the windows. "I've kept it because something about it—" He paused, seeming to choose his words with unusual care. "Something about it feels important, though I couldn't tell you why." With that cryptic statement hanging in the air between them, Wendell left, the door closing behind him with quiet finality. Alone in Prince's cheerful bedroom, surrounded by the evidence of the life her son had lived without her, Rosie sank onto the window seat and allowed herself a moment of pure, overwhelming emotion. Tears she'd held back through the entire confrontation spilled silently down her cheeks. Tears of joy at finding her son, of pain at Wendell's cold suspicion, of hope that perhaps, somewhere deep in his subconscious, he remembered her after. The photograph was the key. Somehow Prince had found it, had recognized her in it, despite never having seen her face except in his mysterious dreams. And Wendell, pragmatic, logical Wendell, had kept it all these years, drawn to it by some instinct he couldn't explain away with his rational mind. Outside, storm clouds gathered on the horizon, reminder of another storm 7 years ago that had changed the course of all their lives. As thunder rumbled in the distance, Rosie wiped away her tears and squared her shoulders, determination replacing uncertainty. She had found them, her son, who had somehow recognized her across time and distance, and Wendell, who carried echoes of their connection, even if he couldn't access the memories directly. Now, she needed to find a way to bridge the gap between past and present, to rebuild the family that should have been hers all along. As rain began to patter against the windows, Rosie made a silent promise, to Prince, to Wendell, to herself. No matter what obstacles Wendell's suspicion or his protective instincts threw in her path, she would find a way to restore what had been lost, to reclaim the love that had burned between them during that stormy night 7 years ago, even if she had to make him fall in love with her all over again. The storm was coming, but this time she wouldn't disappear into the night. This time she would stand firm against whatever forces tried to separate them. This time she would fight for her family with everything she had. Chapter 3. The Memory Awakens. The storm that had threatened all day finally broke as night descended on the Taylor estate. Rain lashed against windows like desperate fingers seeking entry, while lightning transformed the manicured grounds into stark tableaus of silver and shadow. Inside, Rosie had just finished helping Prince with his evening routine, marveling at how naturally they had fallen into a comfortable rhythm despite having only met that morning. "Will you tell me a bedtime story?" Prince asked, his blue eyes, mirror images of her own, wide with hope as she tucked his blankets around him. "About the night you saved Daddy from the fire monster." Rosie hesitated, torn between Wendell's explicit instruction to correct Prince's misapprehension and her overwhelming desire to share their true history with her son. "How about a different story tonight?" she suggested gently. "One about a tremendous crash of thunder shook the mansion, rattling windows and cutting the lights, plunging the room into sudden darkness." Prince's terrified scream pierced the shadows as he bolted upright, arms reaching blindly for Rosie. "The fire monster," he cried, his small body trembling violently against her as she gathered him close. "He's coming back for Daddy. He's angry because you saved him." "Shh, sweetheart," Rosie murmured, her heart breaking at his terror. She rocked him gently, an instinctive motion she'd dreamed of for 7 years. "It's just thunder. Nothing can hurt you here." "Promise," he whispered against her neck, his tears warm against her skin. "I promise." She kissed his forehead, breathing in the sweet scent of his hair. "You know what helps me when I'm scared of storms? Songs." Without waiting for a response, Rosie began to sing softly. A lullaby her own mother had sung to her, one she had hummed to her pregnant belly each night when her only connection to her child had been the flutter of movement beneath her heart. Prince's trembling gradually subsided as her voice filled the darkness, his breathing slowing as he nestled against her. Rosie was so focused on comforting him that she didn't notice the bedroom door opening until lamplight spilled across the floor, illuminating Wendell's imposing silhouette. "Prince?" His deep voice carried concern as he approached. The emergency. Lamp in his hand, casting dramatic shadows across his carved features. "Are you all right, buddy?" "Mommy's singing made the monsters go away," Prince mumbled sleepily, his eyes already heavy-lidded with approaching slumber. Wendell's gaze lifted to Rosie's face, something unreadable flickering in his expression as he observed her cradling his son. For a moment, the three of them existed in perfect tableau, a family united by blood, if not by memory. "That song," Wendell said slowly, his brow furrowing. "I've heard it before." Rosie's heart stuttered in her chest. "It's just an old lullaby," she replied, her voice barely audible above the rain. Wendell stepped closer, placing the lamp on the bedside table. The warm light revealed Prince now sleeping peacefully against Rosie's shoulder, his small face relaxed. "In complete trust. Let me help you," Wendell murmured, reaching to take Prince from her arms. As their hands brushed during the transfer, a jolt of electricity coursed between them, so powerful that Wendell faltered, nearly dropping their son. His eyes snapped to Rosie's, wide with confusion and something deeper, more primal. "What was that?" he whispered. The question weighted with meanings beyond the physical sensation they'd shared. Before Rosie could respond, another thunderclap shook the mansion, followed immediately by a blinding flash of lightning that illuminated the room like midday. In that stark, frozen moment, something changed in Wendell's expression. A flash of recognition quickly submerged beneath his careful control. After settling Prince, Wendell gestured for Rosie to follow him into the adjoining sitting room, closing the bedroom door softly behind them. The emergency lighting cast his face in dramatic relief, highlighting the tension in his jaw, the troubled furrow between his brows. "Who are you?" he asked again, but the question lacked the earlier suspicion, replaced by genuine bewilderment. "Why does everything about you feel so familiar? Why does my son respond to you as if he's known you his entire life?" Rosie took a deep breath, knowing this moment could determine everything that followed. "Perhaps," she suggested carefully, "you should show me the photograph Prince mentioned, the one in your private drawer." Wendell studied her face for a long, tense moment before nodding once, decisively. "Wait here." He returned minutes later, a slightly faded photograph held carefully between his fingers. Without a word, he handed it to Rosie, his eyes never leaving her face as she examined it. The image showed Wendell outside a hospital, his arm in a sling, smiling tightly for the camera despite obvious pain and exhaustion. But it was the background that caught Rosie's breath, herself half turned away, her profile unmistakable, though her hair was pulled back in a hasty ponytail, her scrubs clearly visible beneath a light jacket. "This is all I have," Wendell said, quietly. "This and dreams that make no sense, fragments I can't piece together, candlelight, the scent of lavender, blue eyes watching me with such—" He trailed off, shaking his head in frustration. Another crash of thunder directly overhead this time made the windows rattle violently. Wendell winced, his hand going instinctively to his temple, eyes closing momentarily as if in pain. "Wendell!" Rosie stepped closer, concern overriding caution. "Are you all right?" His eyes snapped open at her use of his first name, something dangerous and electric passing between them. "The accident happened during a storm," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Like this one. Sometimes when thunder—" Without warning, Wendell staggered, knees buckling as he clutched his head. Rosie moved without thinking, her nursing instincts taking over as she guided him to a nearby sofa, her hands steady and sure on his shoulders. "Breathe," she instructed, kneeling before him. "Slow, deep breaths. Focus on my voice." His eyes locked, with hers, wide and vulnerable in a way she hadn't seen since that night 7 years ago. "You," he whispered, fingers reaching to brush her cheek with trembling uncertainty. "It was you." Rosie's heart stopped, then lurched painfully back into rhythm. "What do you remember?" she asked, barely daring to hope. "Flames," he murmured, his gaze unfocused, seeing something beyond the present moment. "Pain, rain soaking through my clothes. And you pulling me from the wreckage, your voice ordering me to stay conscious, to focus on your eyes." His fingers traced her features as if memorizing them by touch, sending shivers of awareness cascading through Rosie's body. "You took me somewhere, not the hospital, a small house filled with books and plants." "My cottage," Rosie confirmed, her voice thick with emotion. "The storm had washed out the bridge to town. I couldn't get you to a hospital until morning." Wendell's eyes cleared, focusing on her face with new intensity. "You cared for me through the night, cleaned my wounds, gave me your bed." Heat flooded Rosie's cheeks at the memory of what had followed, how professional distance had dissolved into desperate need, how they had come together with the storm raging around them, finding in each other something neither had known they were seeking. "Yes," she whispered, unable to elaborate further with her heart lodged firmly in her throat. Another flash of lightning, another thunderclap, and suddenly Wendell surged forward, his hands cradling her face with desperate gentleness. "We made love," he said hoarsely, "all night, like the world was ending, like nothing existed beyond that room, that moment." Tears spilled down Rosie's cheeks, joy and relief mingling into overwhelming emotion. "You remember." "Not everything," he admitted, thumbs brushing away her tears. "Fragments only. But enough to know that Prince was right. You're not a stranger. You're—" "His mother," Rosie finished, the truth finally spoken aloud between them. "Our son, Wendell. The child we created that night." For a heartbeat, doubt flickered across his face, the businessman reasserting itself over the man who had begun to remember. "That's impossible to verify without a DNA test," Rosie nodded. "I would expect nothing less. I've spent 7 years searching for you, for him. I have nothing to hide." Wendell released her face, running a hand through his hair as he processed this revelation. "If what you're saying is true, why didn't you find me sooner? Why wait 7 years? The question held no accusation, only genuine confusion. Rosie sank onto the sofa beside him, suddenly exhausted by the weight of secrets too long carried alone. "I tried," she explained, her voice soft with remembered pain. "You left before dawn, leaving only a thank you note. No name, no contact information. When I discovered I was pregnant weeks later, I had nothing to go on but a description and the general direction your car had been heading." She twisted her hands in her lap, reliving the desperate search that had consumed her early pregnancy. "By the time I tracked down your identity through hospital records, you had married Victoria and moved to Europe. The society pages announced you were expecting a child with your new wife." Understanding dawned in Wendell's eyes. "You thought I'd moved on, that I had another family." "What was I supposed to think?" Rosie asked, 7 years of pain bleeding into her voice. "You couldn't remember me. You had a pregnant wife. I was a nursing student, barely making ends meet. What right did I have to upend your life?" "Every right," Wendell said fiercely, capturing her hands in his. "He's your son, our son." The simple acknowledgement, spoken with such certainty, broke something open inside Rosie, a dam of emotion she'd held back for 7 long years. Tears flowed freely down her cheeks as Wendell pulled her against his chest, his arms encircling her with protective strength. "I'm so sorry," he murmured against her hair. "So sorry I couldn't remember, that I doubted you, that you faced all." This alone. Outside, the storm began to abate, thunder receding into the distance as rain gentled against the windows. Inside, Rosie and Wendell remained entwined, the past and present merging into a new reality neither had dared hope for. "What happens now?" Rosie finally asked, her voice muffled against his chest. Wendell pulled back slightly, tilting her chin, up to meet his gaze. In his eyes, she saw determination, wonder, and something deeper that made her pulse quicken. "Now," he said softly, "we take this one step at a time, a DNA test for formality's sake, and then we figure out how to be a family, the family we should have been all along." His gaze dropped to her lips, lingering there with unmistakable intent. "But first," he murmured, his voice dropping to a register that sent heat spiraling through her body, "I think I need to remember more clearly exactly what happened that night." The invitation in his words was unmistakable, sending a shiver of anticipation down Rosie's spine. 7 years of longing, of dreaming of this man, crystallized into a moment of perfect clarity. Without hesitation, she leaned forward, closing the distance between them. The first brush of his lips against hers was tentative, questioning, so different from the desperate passion they had shared during the storm. But as Rosie responded, parting her lips in silent invitation, something ignited between them. Recognition, on a cellular level that transcended conscious memory. Wendell groaned, deepening the kiss as his hands tangled in her hair, angling her head to grant him better access. Rosie melted against him, her body remembering what his mind had forgotten, the perfect fit of his mouth against hers, the intoxicating taste that was uniquely him. When they finally broke apart, both breathing heavily, Wendell rested his forehead against hers, eyes closed as if overwhelmed by sensation. "I may not remember everything," he whispered, "but my body remembers you, Rosie Peak, every touch, every taste, every sound you make when pleasure overtakes you." He brushed his lips against hers once more, a feather-light touch that promised so much more. "Stay with me tonight," he murmured against her mouth. "Help me remember everything I've lost." The invitation, spoken with such raw vulnerability, touched something deep within Rosie's soul. This wasn't just about physical desire, though that burned between them with undeniable heat. This was about healing, about reconnecting, about building a bridge between the past they had shared and the future they might create together. "Yes," she whispered, her heart soaring with newfound hope. "Yes to tonight. Yes to remembering. Yes to everything." As Wendell drew her to her feet, leading her toward his chambers with fingers intertwined with hers, Rosie felt the final pieces of her fractured world beginning to heal. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. There were explanations to be made, adjustments to navigate, a life to rebuild from fragments too long separated. But for tonight, for this moment, they had found each other across time and circumstance. Prince slept peacefully in his room, secure in the knowledge his mother had finally returned. And Wendell, her Wendell, was beginning to remember what his heart had never truly forgotten. The storm had passed, leaving in its wake the promise of a new beginning for all of them. Chapter 4. Dangerous Desire. Wendell's private suite was a revelation. Not the cold, impersonal space Rosie had expected, but a sanctuary of understated luxury. Warm woods, leather-bound books, and subtle lighting created an atmosphere both masculine and intimate. The wall of windows overlooking the now calming storm gave the impression of being suspended between earth and sky. Yet Rosie noticed none of this in detail, her senses overwhelmed by Wendell's presence as he led her through the sitting room toward his bedroom. Their fingers remained intertwined, the simple contact sending electric currents up her arm with each step. At the threshold of his bedroom, Wendell paused, turning to face her with an expression so vulnerable it stole her breath. "I need you to understand," he said softly, "that this isn't about physical release for me. This is about remembering us." The distinction, so tenderly expressed, brought tears to Rosie's eyes. "I know," she whispered, reaching up to trace the strong line of his jaw. "For me too." Wendell captured her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm that sent shivers coursing through her body. "I remember fragments," he confessed, his voice rough with emotion. "Your skin in candlelight, the sound of your laughter, how you trembled when I touched you here." His fingers brushed the sensitive spot beneath her ear, making her gasp softly. "And here." His hand skimmed down her side to rest at the curve of her waist. "Help me remember the rest," he murmured, his grey eyes dark with desire and something deeper, more profound. "Help me remember everything I lost." In answer, Rosie stretched up on her toes, pressing her lips to his in a kiss that began with gentle invitation and quickly blazed into consuming hunger. Wendell responded instantly, his arms encircling her waist to lift her against him, eliminating any space between their bodies as he deepened the kiss with passionate intensity. They moved into the bedroom without breaking contact, a dance of desire and rediscovery that left them breathless. When the backs of Rosie's knees met the edge of his massive bed, Wendell finally pulled back, his breathing ragged as he gazed down at her with wonder. "You're even more beautiful than I remembered," he said, his thumbs tracing her flushed cheekbones. With reverence, Rosie's heart swelled at the admission, at the knowledge that somewhere in his subconscious he had carried her image all these years. "Show me," she whispered, a challenge and a plea in equal measure. "Show me what you remember." Something dangerous and thrilling flashed in Wendell's eyes at her words. With deliberate slowness, he began unbuttoning her simple blouse, each newly revealed inch of skin receiving its own dedicated attention from his fingers, his lips, his tongue. By the time the garment slipped from her shoulders, Rosie was trembling with need, her body remembering his touch even across 7 years of separation. "I remember this," Wendell murmured against the curve of her throat, his hands spanning her waist with possessive heat. "How responsive you are, how every touch makes you shiver." As if to prove his point, he traced the lace edge of her bra with one finger, smiling against her skin when she gasped. "And I remember this sound," he continued, his voice dropping to a register that vibrated through her very bones. "The little catch in your breath when I touch you just right." Rosie's fingers tangled in his thick hair, holding him to her as sensations cascaded through her body. What else? She encouraged breathlessly. What else do you remember? In response, Wendell lifted her onto the bed with effortless strength, following her down until his weight pressed her deliciously into the mattress. I remember how perfectly we fit together, he said, his eyes never leaving hers as he settled between her thighs. As if you were made for me, as if we were two halves of the same soul. The words, achingly romantic from a man who dealt primarily in facts and figures, brought fresh tears to Rosie's eyes. We created a child that night, she reminded him softly, her hands framing his beloved face. A perfect blend of both of us. Something shifted in Wendell's expression at the mention of Prince. Wonder and possessiveness and a fierce protectiveness that made Rosie's heart swell with love. Our son, he said, testing the words as if tasting their meaning for the first time. The best of both of us. He lowered his head, capturing her mouth in a kiss of such tender passion that Rosie felt it resonate in the very center of her being. Everything that had been building between them, the attraction, the connection, the shared history they were only beginning to reconstruct, crystallized into this perfect moment of communion. Their remaining clothes fell away under eager hands, each new expanse of skin explored with reverent attention. Wendell worshipped Rosie's body with the dedicated focus he brought to everything important in his life, relearning her most sensitive places, rediscovering the touches that made her gasp his name into the darkness. When he finally joined their bodies moving within her with exquisite control, Rosie felt the last pieces of her fragmented heart click into place. This perfect union, this sense of completion, was what she had been missing for 7 long years. Not just physical pleasure, though, that built between them with every measured thrust, but the soul-deep connection that had haunted both their dreams. Rosie, Wendell breathed against her lips, his voice strained with the effort of maintaining control. Look at me. I need to see your eyes. She obeyed, locking her gaze with his as they moved together, as pleasure built between them like a gathering storm. In his eyes, she saw recognition dawning, memories breaking through the barriers, of amnesia, of time, of circumstance. I remember, he gasped, his rhythm faltering as emotion overwhelmed him. I remember everything, the storm, your cottage, how you sang to me when pain threatened to drag me under. Tears spilled from Rosie's eyes as she clutched him closer, her body and heart open to him completely. Yes, she encouraged, her lips finding his in desperate affirmation. Yes, my love. The endearment, unplanned but absolutely true, seemed to break the last of Wendell's restraint. With a groan that vibrated through both their bodies, he increased his pace, driving them both toward the pinnacle of pleasure with single-minded determination. When release finally claimed them, it was with a synchronicity that transcended physical connection. 2 souls recognizing each other across time and circumstance, falling together, catching each other, becoming whole in a burst of sensation that left them both breathless and trembling in the aftermath. They remained entwined as their breathing gradually slowed, neither willing to relinquish the connection they had rediscovered. Wendell's weight pressed Rosie into the mattress, a delicious anchor to reality, as her mind and heart adjusted to the seismic shift that had occurred between them. It was real, Wendell finally murmured, his lips brushing her temple as he rolled to his side, keeping her firmly in the circle of his arms. All of it, the dreams, the fragments, the sense of missing something crucial. It was you, Rosie. It was always you. Rosie nestled closer, her head finding its natural place in the hollow of his shoulder, her hand resting over his steadying heartbeat. I never stopped looking for you, she confessed, even when I thought you had moved on, had built a life without me. Something in my heart wouldn't let me give up. Wendell's arms tightened around her convulsively. I'm so sorry, he whispered into her hair, "for not remembering, for not finding you first, for all the years we lost." "Not lost," Rosie corrected gently, lifting her head to meet his troubled gaze. "Just delayed. We're here now. We have Prince. We have each other. Everything else is just details." A smile touched Wendell's lips, transforming his face from its habitual seriousness into something breathtakingly beautiful. "Always the optimist," he murmured, brushing a strand of hair from her face with tender fingers. "It's one of the things I love about you." The casual admission of love, spoken as if it were an established fact rather than a new revelation, made Rosie's heart skip. "You love me?" she asked softly, needing to hear the words directly, unambiguously. Wendell's expression turned serious once more, his eyes searching hers with an intensity that left no room for doubt. "I loved you that night 7 years ago," he said simply. "I loved you in my dreams, even when I couldn't remember your face. And I love you now, Rosie Peake, with a certainty that defies rational explanation." The declaration, spoken with such absolute conviction, washed away the last of Rosie's doubts about herself, about their future, about his ability to fully reclaim what trauma had stolen from them. "I love you too," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I never stopped, not for a single day." Wendell pulled her closer, claiming her mouth in a kiss that promised forever, even as it rekindled the desire that simmered constantly between them. As his hands began their expert exploration once more, as pleasure built anew within Rosie's responsive body, a sense of perfect rightness settled over her. They had found each other across time and circumstance, had created a beautiful child. Together had overcome trauma and separation to reach this moment of perfect communion. Whatever challenges lay ahead, and Rosie had no illusions that their path would be entirely smooth, they would face them together, strengthened by a bond that had withstood 7 years of absence. As dawn broke over the Taylor estate, painting the sky in delicate hues of pink and gold, Rosie and Wendell finally surrendered to exhaustion, their bodies pleasantly sated, their hearts full of newfound hope. They slept entwined, each unwilling to relinquish contact with the other, even in slumber, as if afraid the miracle they had rediscovered might dissolve with the morning light. Neither stirred when the bedroom door cracked open hours later, revealing Prince's curious face peeping through the gap. The boy observed his parents sleeping peacefully together, a smile of absolute satisfaction spreading across his features before he quietly closed the door and tiptoed away. Some knowledge, after all, transcended rational explanation. Prince Taylor had always known his mother would find them eventually. Now, at last, his family was complete. Chapter 5. The Truth Revealed. Morning sunlight streamed through Wendell's bedroom windows, casting golden patterns across rumpled sheets and entwined bodies. Rosie stirred first, momentarily disoriented by unfamiliar surroundings, until memories of the night flooded back, Wendell remembering her, their passionate reunion, declarations of love exchanged in breathless whispers. Her movement roused Wendell, who tightened his arm around her waist before his eyes even opened, as if afraid she might disappear. When his storm-gray eyes finally met hers, the warmth in them made her heart skip. "I thought I might have dreamed you," he murmured, his voice rough with sleep as he traced her features with gentle fingers. "That I'd wake up and find myself alone again." Rosie turned to press a kiss to his palm. "No more dreams," she promised. "Just reality. Us." His smile transformed his face, erasing years of solitude and heartache. "Us," he repeated, the simple word laden with meaning, and Prince. At the mention of their son, shared purpose crystallized between them. They needed to confirm what their hearts already knew, to make their strange, miraculous reunion official with the proof the world would demand. "The DNA test," Rosie said, uncertainty flickering across her face. "You still want it?" Wendell sat up, drawing her with him so they faced each other in the morning light. "Not for me," he assured her, taking both her hands in his. "I know the truth. But for Prince's sake, for legal protection, for silencing any potential questions or gossip, yes, we need it." His practicality, his protective instinct toward both her and their son, made Rosie love him even more. "Of course," she agreed. "No shadows, no doubts, just clarity for our future." With newfound purpose, they prepared to face the day together. Rosie borrowed clothes from Wendell's closet, the oversized shirt and hastily rolled pants drawing a heated look from him that promised further exploration later. They decided Rosie would return to her quarters to change properly while Wendell arranged for the DNA test and prepared Prince for the news that would change everything. "I'll send Dr. Harmon to your room in an hour," Wendell said as they stood at his bedroom door, reluctant to part even briefly. "He's discreet and efficient. We'll have results by afternoon." So soon. Rosie hadn't expected such speed. Wendell's smile held a hint of his usual commanding confidence. "Being CEO has certain advantages. Harmon owes me several favors." As Rosie turned to leave, Wendell pulled her back for one more kiss. Tender yet possessive, a promise for their future. "This time," he whispered against her lips, "I won't forget." Dr. Harmon proved to be a distinguished older gentleman with kind eyes and professional detachment. He asked no questions as he collected DNA samples from Rosie, simply offering a warm smile that suggested he understood more than anyone had told him. "Mr. Taylor has requested priority processing," he explained as he packed away the samples. "Results should be available by 3 this afternoon." The hours that followed passed with excruciating slowness. Rosie busied herself with the duties assigned to her as Prince's caretaker, though the role had transformed overnight from a means of access to her son into something altogether different. Prince seemed to sense the change in the air, watching her with those perceptive blue eyes, her eyes, as if waiting for confirmation of what he had somehow always known. At precisely 3 o'clock, Wendell summoned Rosie to his study. He stood by the window when she entered, his tall frame outlined against the afternoon sunlight, tension evident in the set of his shoulders. When he turned, his expression was unreadable. "Wendell?" she asked, heart suddenly pounding with inexplicable fear. "What is it?" In answer, he crossed the room in 3 long strides and gathered her into his arms, lifting her clear off her feet in an embrace that stole her breath. 99.998% probability, he murmured against her hair. "You are without question Prince's biological mother." Joy exploded through Rosie like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. Tears spilled down her cheeks as Wendell set her gently on her feet, his thumbs brushing the moisture away with infinite tenderness. "I never doubted it," he confessed, pressing his forehead to hers. "Not really, not after last night. But having it confirmed, having irrefutable proof," he drew a shaky breath. "It makes everything real. You're real. What we have is real." Rosie wound her arms around his neck, happiness too great for words bubbling up inside her. After 7 years of searching, of hoping against hope, of dreaming, of this moment it had finally arrived, scientific confirmation of what her heart had always known. "What do we tell Prince?" she asked, when she could finally speak past the emotion clogging her throat. "The truth," Wendell said without hesitation. "A simplified version, appropriate for his age, but the truth nonetheless. He deserves that much. He's known all along somehow." The certainty in his voice, the absolute conviction that honesty was the only path forward, reassured Rosie more than anything else could have. This was the man she had fallen in love with during that stormy night, compassionate, direct, uncompromising in his integrity. "When?" she asked simply. "Now," Wendell decided, his fingers intertwining with hers. "No more waiting, no more secrets. It's time for our family to truly begin." Together, they went to find their son, hands clasped like teenagers on a first date, hearts pounding with nervous anticipation. They found Prince in the garden, carefully examining a caterpillar on a leaf with the focused attention unique to children. "Prince!" Wendell called, his voice gentler than Rosie had ever heard it. "We need to talk to you, buddy. Something important." The boy looked up, his gaze immediately taking in their joined hands, a smile of pure satisfaction spreading across his face. Without a word, he abandoned his caterpillar and ran to them, throwing one arm around each of their legs in a three-way hug that nearly toppled them all. "You remembered," he said simply, looking up at his father with absolute certainty. "You remembered, Mommy." Wendell knelt to Prince's level, bringing himself eye to eye with his son. "Yes," he confirmed, his voice rough with emotion. "I remembered, and we've confirmed what you somehow knew all along. Rosie is your mother, your real mother." Prince rolled his eyes in a gesture so reminiscent of Rosie that Wendell couldn't help laughing. "I told you," the boy said with the exaggerated patience of a child explaining something obvious to an adult. "I told you she was my real mommy. I knew." "You did know," Rosie agreed, kneeling beside Wendell to complete their small circle. "And now we need to explain how that happened, why I haven't been with you until now." Prince's expression turned serious, his small brow furrowing in concentration. "Because Daddy forgot you," he said with surprising insight. "The monsters made him forget after the fire." Wendell and Rosie exchanged amazed glances at their son's perception. "That's partly right," Wendell explained gently. "I had an accident, the fire you mentioned, and Rosie saved me. But I hurt my head and couldn't remember her afterward. And I didn't know how to find your father when I discovered. I was going to have you," Rosie continued softly. "By the time I learned who he was, he had moved far away. But you found us now," Prince stated, his absolute certainty both touching and humbling. "Yes, sweetheart, I found you." Tears blurred Rosie's vision as Prince reached for her, small arms, wrapping around her neck with complete trust and acceptance. Over their son's dark head, her eyes met Wendell's, finding them suspiciously bright with emotion. Without words, they shared a moment of perfect understanding, of gratitude for this miracle, of determination to make up for lost time, of absolute commitment to the family they had almost lost. "Does this mean you're staying forever?" Prince asked as he pulled back, his expression suddenly anxious. "You won't go away again?" "Never again," Rosie promised fervently, her hand finding Wendell's in silent solidarity. "We're a family now, you, me, and your father. Nothing will separate us again." Prince considered this with the gravity only children can bring to momentous decisions. "Good," he finally declared with a definitive nod. "Because I already told Mr. Barrington you're my real mommy, and he would be very upset if I had to tell him I was wrong." The simple statement, so childlike in its logic, yet so profound in its acceptance, broke the tension completely. Wendell laughed, the sound freer and more joyous than Rosie had yet heard from him, and she couldn't help joining in, happiness bubbling up like a spring too long suppressed. Prince giggled along, though clearly not understanding why his statement was funny, simply delighted to be part of this newfound joy. As their laughter subsided, Wendell gathered both Rosie and Prince into his arms, creating a circle of connection that felt like coming home after a lifetime of wandering. "There's something else you should know, buddy," Wendell said, his voice vibrating against Rosie's cheek where it pressed against his chest. "I love your mother very much, I think I've loved her since the moment she pulled me from that burning car, even if I couldn't remember her face." The declaration, spoken so openly before their son, filled Rosie's heart to overflowing. "And I love your father," she added softly. "I never stopped, not for a single day." Prince wiggled slightly in their embrace, looking up with a smile of pure satisfaction. "I know," he said simply. "That's why you found each other again, because love is stronger than monsters." Out of the mouths of babes, Rosie thought, meeting Wendell's gaze over their son's head. Love was indeed stronger than time, than trauma, than separation. It had guided Prince's inexplicable recognition of her, had preserved Wendell's fractured memories, had given her the strength to keep searching when all seemed lost. As the three of them remained embraced in the garden, surrounded by the beauty of nature and the even greater beauty of newfound connection, Rosie felt the final pieces of her heart clicking into place. The road ahead wouldn't be entirely smooth. There would be adjustments, explanations, a life to rebuild from scattered fragments. But they would face it together as a family bound by blood and by a love strong enough to transcend time itself. The truth, finally revealed in its entirety, had set them free to begin again, to build the life they had been denied for 7 long years. And that was all that mattered. Chapter 6. Beginning to trust. The transformation of Rosie's life happened with breathtaking speed. Within days of the DNA confirmation, Wendell had moved her belongings from the staff quarters to the master suite, much to Mrs. Winter's thinly veiled disapproval and Mrs. Jenkins's knowing smiles. The staff adjusted to her new position with varying degrees of acceptance, but Wendell made it abundantly clear, through both words and actions, that Rosie was to be respected as Prince's mother and his partner. "I don't care what anyone thinks," he told her one evening as they lay entwined in their bed, his fingers tracing idle patterns on her bare shoulder. "You are Prince's mother. You are the woman I love. Everything else is irrelevant." The conviction in his voice, the protective way his arm tightened around her waist, filled Rosie with a sense of security she had never known. Yet questions remained, shadows that occasionally darkened her newfound happiness. "Tell me about Victoria," she said softly, feeling him tense at the name of his ex-wife. "Prince mentioned her once, but you never talk about your marriage." Wendell was silent for so long that Rosie wondered if he would refuse to answer. When he finally spoke, his voice held a carefully controlled neutrality that told her more than his words. "It was a business arrangement more than a marriage," he admitted, his gaze fixed on the ceiling. "After the accident, I threw myself into work, trying to fill the emptiness I couldn't explain. Victoria was the daughter of my biggest investor, beautiful, sophisticated, appropriate in every way that mattered to my board of directors." His hand found Rosie's, intertwining their fingers as if drawing strength from her touch. "We dated for 6 months, became engaged because it seemed the logical next step. I didn't love her. I'm not sure I was capable of love then, with so much of myself missing." "What happened?" Rosie prompted gently when he fell silent again. A humorless smile touched Wendell's lips. "Prince happened. Victoria discovered she was pregnant 3 months after our wedding. She'd never wanted children, made that clear from the beginning, but accepted the pregnancy as an inconvenience to be endured." The clinical way he described it made Rosie's heart ache. She never bonded with him. "Not even after his birth," Wendell confirmed, pain evident in his voice despite his attempt at detachment. "She hired a night nurse immediately, insisted on formula despite the doctor's recommendations for breastfeeding, returned to her social calendar within weeks. Prince was an accessory to her, not a child to be loved." Rosie's arms tightened around him instinctively, her maternal heart breaking at the thought of her baby, their baby, treated with such cold indifference. How did the divorce happen? And came home early from a business trip, Wendell said, his jaw tightening at the memory. Found Prince alone with a new, inexperienced nanny while Victoria was in Saint-Tropez with her latest lover. She hadn't even told me she was leaving the country. The betrayal in his voice wasn't that of a jealous husband, but of a father whose child had been abandoned. I filed for divorce the next day, offering a generous settlement in exchange for full custody. She accepted without argument, seemed relieved, actually, to be freed from the responsibilities of motherhood. She just walked away from both of you. Rosie couldn't imagine abandoning Prince for anything in the world. Wendell's expression darkened. Not quite so cleanly. Victoria has a particular talent for manipulation and deception. During the proceedings, she attempted to use Prince as leverage for a larger settlement, threatening a custody battle she had no interest in winning, just to extort more money. This new information cast a more sinister light on Victoria's character. She sounds calculating. Calculatingly cruel, Wendell corrected, his voice hard. When she realized I would fight her to the last penny for Prince's custody, she changed tactics, started spreading rumors about my mental fitness, suggesting the accident had left me unstable and prone to delusions. It nearly worked. The board considered forcing me to step down temporarily. Understanding dawned in Rosie's mind. This was the root of Wendell's initial suspicion of her, his protective ferocity toward Prince. He had already seen one woman weaponize his son against him. The thought of another claiming him only to disappoint him would be unbearable. I would never abandon him, she whispered, moving to straddle Wendell's hips, forcing him to meet her gaze. Never. He's part of me, Wendell, the best part. Something in Wendell's expression softened, the shadows receding from his eyes as he reached up to trace her face. I know, he said simply. He recognized that from the first moment. Perhaps children sense these things better than adults. Rosie leaned down to kiss him, pouring all her love, all her commitment into the connection. As passion reignited between them, as their bodies joined in perfect harmony, she silently promised both Wendell and their son that she would spend a lifetime making up for the years they had lost. The next morning, breakfast brought a surprise announcement from Prince. I don't want to go to boarding school anymore, he declared, pushing his eggs around his plate with unusual concentration. I want to stay home with you and Mommy. Wendell and Rosie exchanged glances across the table. Prince's prestigious private school, where he attended as a day student but would transition to boarding the following year, had been a source of pride for Wendell, secured through connections and an obscene amount of money. You love Westfield Academy, Wendell reminded him gently. Your friends are there, your science club. Prince shook his head with stubborn determination. I only went because you were sad and worked all the time. Now you're happy, and Mommy's here, and I want to be home. The simple logic, the raw emotional honesty of a child who had clearly been making accommodations for his father's emotional state, hit Wendell hard. Rosie watched understanding dawn in his eyes. How much of Prince's seemingly perfect behavior had been an attempt to protect his father from further pain? We'll consider other options, Wendell promised, reaching across to squeeze his son's small hand. Perhaps a day school closer to home, where you can return to us every afternoon. The smile that lit Prince's face was worth any potential educational sacrifice. Really? And can Mommy help with my homework instead of tutors? She's super smart. She was going to be a nurse. Rosie's heart swelled at his unshakable faith in her abilities. I'd be honored to help with homework, she said, her voice thick with emotion. And maybe we could convert one of the rooms into a proper study space for you, with all your books and science equipment. Prince's enthusiasm for this idea launched him into detailed plans for his dream study space, complete with telescope, Microscope and a really big tank for my future pet octopus. Wendell listened with amused indulgence, but Rosie noticed the thoughtfulness in his eyes, the way he watched their interaction with wonder. Later, as Prince ran off to prepare for his current school day, Wendell pulled Rosie into his arms. "You're changing us," he murmured against her hair. "Both of us, for the better." "We're changing each other," she corrected, nestling against his chest. "Becoming the family we were always meant to be." His arms tightened around her, a silent acknowledgement of the truth in her words. In just days, they had begun the process of healing wounds, 7 years in the making. Wendell's guarded heart opening to love, Prince's quiet loneliness giving way to exuberant joy, Rosie's aching emptiness filled by the family she had searched. For so desperately, they still had challenges to face. Explaining their unusual situation to Wendell's business associates, navigating Prince's educational transition, building a life together from such unconventional beginnings. And perhaps, most concerningly, the shadow of Victoria lingered in Rosie's mind. A woman that, manipulative and vindictive, might not stay away forever, especially if she learned that Prince's true mother had entered the picture. But as Rosie stood in the circle of Wendell's arms, listening to their son's cheerful humming from the next room, she knew with bone-deep certainty that they would face those challenges together, strengthened by the love that had survived 7 years of separation. The trust between them, once fractured by circumstance and misunderstanding, was growing stronger each day, a foundation for the future they would build together, one precious moment at a time. Chapter 7. Hearts Entwined. 3 weeks after the truth had been revealed, Wendell surprised Rosie with an envelope at breakfast, sliding it across the table with studied casualness that couldn't quite hide the anticipation in his eyes. "What's this?" she asked, wiping jam from Prince's chin before accepting the thick cream-colored paper. "Open it and find out," Wendell replied, his lips twitching with barely suppressed pleasure. Inside was a set of printed boarding passes, 3 first-class tickets to the coast, departing that afternoon. Rosie looked up in surprise, finding both Wendell and Prince watching her with identical expressions of excitement. "A family trip to my beach house," Wendell explained, reaching across to squeeze her hand. "Just the 3 of us. No staff, no interruptions, no business calls, just family time." "It's our favorite place," Prince added, bouncing in his chair. "There's a private beach and dolphins and stars at night that look close enough to touch." Rosie felt tears gathering in her eyes at the thoughtful gesture. Despite the joy of their reunion, the past weeks had been intense. Staff adjusting to her new position, Wendell organizing Prince's transfer to a prestigious day school, both of them learning to navigate co-parenting after years apart. This and Drip offered a precious opportunity to simply be together, away from watchful eyes and lingering whispers. "It sounds perfect," she said softly, turning her hand to interlace her fingers with Wendell's. "When do we leave?" "Right after Prince's." "Last class," Wendell replied with a grin that made him look years younger. "Pack for a long weekend. Casual clothes only. The beach house has rules against business suits and formal dresses." The playful side of Wendell, emerging with increasing frequency as their relationship deepened, never failed to delight Rosie. This was the man she had glimpsed during that stormy night 7 years ago. Passionate, warm, capable of joy that matched the intensity of his more serious nature. The beach house proved to be a modernist marvel of glass and sustainable wood, perched on a cliff overlooking a pristine private beach. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered panoramic views of the Pacific Ocean, while minimalist furnishings in soothing blues and neutrals created an atmosphere of tranquil luxury. "It's breathtaking," Rosie murmured, as Wendell led her through the main living area, his hand warm at the small of her back. "Dad built it after his accident," Prince informed her matter-of-factly, already dumping his small backpack on a chair. He said the ocean helped his headaches go away. Wendell's arms slipped around Rosie's waist, drawing her closer. I came here seeking peace, he admitted quietly, never understanding who I was actually missing. The simple honesty of his statement, the vulnerability in his eyes, made Rosie's heart swell with love. Standing on tiptoe, she brushed a kiss across his lips, savoring the way his arms automatically tightened around her. Their moment was interrupted by Prince's dramatic, gagging noise from across the room. "Dad, you promised we'd go to the beach before dinner. Stop kissing Mom and let's go!" Laughter broke the moment, Wendell's deep chuckle mingling with Rosie's lighter tones in a harmony that felt as natural as breathing. "Your son has spoken," Rosie teased, poking Wendell's chest playfully. "The kissing will have to wait." The heated promise in Wendell's eyes as he released her sent pleasant shivers down Rosie's spine. "Later," he murmured, his voice dropping to a register meant only for her ears. "When our impatient offspring is asleep." The afternoon passed in a blur of simple joys, building sandcastles with Prince, collecting seashells along the shoreline, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. After a dinner of grilled seafood on the deck, they roasted marshmallows over a small fire pit while Prince regaled Rosie with elaborate stories of past adventures at the beach house. When the boy finally succumbed to exhaustion, eyes drooping, despite his valiant efforts to stay awake, Wendell carried him to bed with tender care. Rosie followed, watching from the doorway as Wendell tucked the blankets around their son, brushing dark hair, so like his own, from Prince's forehead with gentle fingers. "He's perfect," Wendell said softly as they closed the door, leaving it slightly ajar. "Perfect because he's half you." The words, spoken with such simple certainty, touched Rosie deeply. Taking Wendell's hand, she led him back to the deck, where the night air carried the salt tang of the ocean and stars dusted the sky in brilliant profusion. "Dance with me," Wendell said suddenly, pulling her into his arms without waiting for a response. "There's no music," Rosie pointed out, though she went willingly, her body melting against his with practiced ease. Wendell smiled, the moonlight silvering his features into something almost otherworldly in its beauty. "We don't need music," he murmured, beginning to sway gently, one hand splayed across her lower back, the other holding hers against his chest. "Just this. Just us." As they moved together beneath the starlit sky, the rhythmic crash of waves providing all the accompaniment they needed, Rosie felt a sense of completion that transcended words. This man, this child, this life they were building together. It was everything she had dreamed of during those long, lonely years of separation. "I want to marry you," Wendell said suddenly, stopping their dance to look down at her with an intensity that stole her breath. "What?" she managed, certain she'd misheard. His hands came up to frame her face, thumbs gently tracing her cheekbones, as if memorizing their contour. "I want to marry you, Rosie Peake. Not because of Prince, not because of societal expectations, but because I cannot imagine a single day of my future without you in it." The declaration, spoken with such raw honesty, made tears spring to Rosie's eyes. "Wendell, we've only been together for 7 years and 3 weeks, he interrupted with a smile that held equal parts tenderness and certainty. "Our bodies were separated, but our souls never were. Prince knew it. Deep down, I think we both knew it too." He kissed her then, a gentle meeting of lips that somehow conveyed more devotion than their most passionate embraces. "I've never believed in soulmates or destiny," he continued, his forehead resting against hers. "I'm a businessman. I deal in facts and probability. But what are the odds that our son would recognize you instantly, that my body would remember yours even when my mind couldn't, that every night for 7 years I'd dream of blue eyes without understanding why? The simple logic, the absolute certainty in his voice, washed away Rosie's hesitation like waves erasing footprints on sand. This was Wendell, her Wendell, the man who had captured her heart in a single stormy night and never relinquished it, even across years of separation. "Yes," she whispered, joy bubbling up inside her like an artesian spring. "Yes, I'll marry you." For a heartbeat, Wendell simply stared at her, as if he hadn't truly expected her to agree so readily. Then his face transformed with a smile of such radiant happiness that it nearly stopped Rosie's heart. "You're sure?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. In answer, Rosie wound her arms around his neck, pulling his mouth down to hers. The kiss began gently, a confirmation of their commitment, but quickly deepened into something more primal as Wendell's arms encircled her waist, lifting her clear off her feet. When they finally broke apart, both breathing heavily, Wendell kept her suspended in his embrace, unwilling to let even gravity separate them. "I don't have a ring," he admitted. "This wasn't planned, at least not for tonight. I'd intended something more elaborate." Rosie laughed softly, cradling his beloved face between her palms. "This is perfect," she assured him. "Just us, the ocean, the moonlight. I don't need elaborate. Wendell, I just need you." With a groan that was half desire, half reverence, Wendell reclaimed her mouth, his kiss deeper, more demanding than before. One hand slid beneath the light sundress she wore, finding bare skin that heated instantly under his touch. "Here?" Rosie gasped as his lips traveled down her throat. "Here," Wendell confirmed, his voice a low rumble that sent shivers racing along her nerve endings. "Under the stars. Consider it the first of many wedding gifts." Their lovemaking was unhurried yet intense, each touch infused with the promise they'd just exchanged. The night air on bare skin, the occasional splash of seawater reaching their entwined bodies, the canopy of stars above, all combined to create a sensory experience that transcended mere physical pleasure. "Mine," Wendell murmured against her skin as they moved together. "Always mine. Always," Rosie agreed breathlessly, her hands clutching his shoulders as waves of pleasure built within her, mirroring the rhythm of the ocean beside them. When release finally claimed them both, it was with a synchronicity that seemed to underscore the rightness of their union. Two souls falling together, catching each other, rising as one into something greater than either could achieve alone. Afterward, as they lay tangled together on a beach blanket, Wendell's jacket draped over them and the warm night air caressing their cooling skin, Rosie felt a sense of perfect peace settle over her. "What are you thinking?" Wendell asked, his fingers tracing idle patterns on her bare shoulder. Rosie smiled, nestling closer. "That life has a strange way of coming full circle," she replied. 7 years ago, I pulled a stranger from a burning car, never imagining he would someday be my fiancé. Wendell pressed a kiss to her forehead, his arms tightening around her. "Not a stranger," he corrected gently. "Just a soul who hadn't yet recognized its other half." The poetic sentiment, so unexpected from a man who dealt primarily in facts and figures, brought fresh tears to Rosie's eyes. "I love you," she whispered, the words feeling simultaneously inadequate and all-encompassing. "And I love you," Wendell replied with absolute certainty. "Yesterday, today, tomorrow, always." As they lay beneath the endless canopy of stars, the rhythm of the waves a soothing counterpoint to their synchronized heartbeats, Rosie knew they could face whatever challenges the future held. Together, their hearts entwined as surely as their bodies, their family complete at last. Chapter 8. Twisted Hearts. The engagement ring on Rosie's finger, an emerald surrounded by diamonds that matched her eyes perfectly, caught the morning sunlight as she helped Prince with his breakfast. 3 weeks had passed since their magical weekend at the beach house. Weeks filled with wedding plans, school transitions, and the everyday joys of family life that Rosie had dreamed of for 7 long years. "Mom, can we get a dog after the wedding?" Prince asked, carefully cutting his pancakes into precise triangles, a habit he'd inherited from his father. "Dad always said no because he travels too much, but now you're here to help. And I promise. I'll walk it every day." Rosie smiled, brushing his dark hair, so like Wendell's, back from his forehead. "We'll discuss it as a family," she promised. "But I think it's a wonderful idea." "Discuss what as a family?" Wendell asked, entering the kitchen in his perfectly tailored suit. Despite his formal business attire, his eyes were warm as he bent to kiss Rosie, lingering just long enough to make her heart flutter before dropping a kiss on Prince's head. "A dog," Prince announced excitedly. "Mom thinks it's a good idea." Wendell raised an eyebrow at Rosie, amusement playing at the corners of his mouth. "Does she now? Interesting negotiation tactic involving our son before approaching me. I said we'd discuss it as a family," Rosie clarified, though she couldn't help smiling at Wendell's teasing tone. These moments of easy domesticity still felt miraculous after so many years of longing and separation. Wendell's phone buzzed, interrupting their family moment. His expression shifted as he read the message, the warmth in his eyes replaced by a tension Rosie had come to recognize as his business face. "Everything okay?" she asked, pouring him coffee as he slipped the phone back into his pocket. "Just work," he replied, but the tightness around his mouth told Rosie there was more to it. Before she could press further, Mrs. Jenkins bustled in, with the mail, sorting it into neat piles on the counter. "Mr. Taylor, that special package you've been expecting has arrived," she announced, handing him a small box. "And this came by courier for you, specifically, Miss Peake." Rosie accepted the large envelope with surprise. Few people even knew she was at the Taylor estate, and those who did would call rather than send formal correspondence. The return address, Victoria. Hargrove, the name Wendell's ex-wife had reverted to after their divorce, made her blood run cold. Wendell's sharp intake of breath told her he'd seen it too. "Prince, buddy, you should finish getting ready for school," he said, his voice carefully controlled. "The new uniform is in your closet, remember?" Once Prince had left, Wendell turned to Rosie, his expression grave. "Whatever that is, we face it together," he said firmly, taking her hand in his. "Victoria has no power over us or our family." With a deep breath, Rosie opened the envelope and withdrew a thick folder containing photographs, financial statements, and a handwritten note on expensive stationery. As she scanned the contents, her hands began to tremble. "What is it?" Wendell asked, his voice tight with concern. Rosie handed him the note, her throat too constricted to speak. Wendell's face darkened as he read Victoria's elegant script. "Wendell, darling, how quaint that you've fallen for this elaborate con. Did your lost love mention her strategic research into your finances after discovering her pregnancy? Or her detailed plan to infiltrate your household using your pathetically vulnerable son as leverage? Perhaps she forgot to share how she's been systematically building this scheme for years, waiting for the perfect moment to claim her share of the Taylor fortune. The enclosed evidence should help clear your besotted mind. Do reconsider our discussion about reconciliation. I've always been so much better suited to your world than this calculated gold digger. With concern for your happiness, Victoria." "This is absurd," Wendell said flatly, dropping the note on the table. An obvious attempt to cause trouble. But Rosie had been examining the photographs, screenshots of searches about Wendell's net worth, printouts of forum discussions about paternity rights and inheritance laws, images clearly altered to suggest she'd been stalking Wendell for years before her arrival at the mansion. "She's trying to make it look like I orchestrated everything," Rosie whispered, her voice shaking, "like finding you was some elaborate scheme for money." Wendell's jaw tightened as he examined the so-called evidence. "It's all fabricated," he said firmly. "Victoria excels at manipulation. I warned you about her talents in this area. This won't work." Yet as he flipped through the documents, Rosie saw something flicker in his eyes. Not doubt exactly, but a shadow of the suspicion she'd once seen there when he'd first questioned her connection to Prince. It vanished almost immediately, replaced by protective anger, but its brief appearance cut Rosie to the core. "Wendell," she said softly, placing her hand over his. "If there's any part of you that wonders—" "No," he interrupted, his voice fierce, as he captured her hand. "Not for a second. Victoria is desperate and vindictive. This is exactly her style. She can't stand to see me happy, especially with someone so different from her world." His certainty should have reassured Rosie, but the shadow she'd glimpsed lingered in her mind. As Wendell made calls to his legal team, instructing them to address Victoria's pathetic attempt at extortion, Rosie found herself examining the carefully crafted evidence. Someone had gone to extraordinary lengths to create a narrative that painted her as a calculating gold digger, manipulating dates, fabricating internet searches, constructing a false history designed to feed any lingering insecurities Wendell might harbor. That evening, after Prince was asleep, Wendell found Rosie in the garden, sitting alone on the stone bench where they often watched the sunset together. His face softened as he sat beside her, taking her hands in his. "James is handling everything," he assured her, referring to his lawyer and closest friend. "Victoria has no legal ground to stand on, and these ridiculous accusations won't change anything between us." Rosie studied his beloved face in the fading light, searching for any trace of the doubt she'd glimpsed earlier. "Are you sure? Earlier, when you saw those papers, just for a moment." Wendell sighed, running a hand through his hair in a gesture of rare vulnerability. "I'd be lying if I said those doctored images didn't strike at old wounds," he admitted quietly. "Victoria's betrayal left scars that are still healing. But Rosie," he cupped her face with tender hands, "that momentary reaction was about my past, not our future, not my trust in you." The honesty in his admission, the vulnerability he was willing to show her, eased some of Rosie's fear. Yet something still nagged at her, a sense that Victoria's attack was just beginning, that the peace they'd found might be more fragile than they wanted to believe. "What did she mean about reconciliation?" Rosie asked, remembering the notes, reference to a previous discussion. "Have you been in contact with her?" A flash of discomfort crossed Wendell's face. "She called last week," he admitted reluctantly. "I didn't mention it because it seemed meaningless, just Victoria being Victoria, suggesting that Prince needed maternal stability that only she could provide. I shut her down immediately." The revelation that he'd kept this from her, however, insignificant it might have seemed, stung more than Rosie wanted to admit. "What else haven't you told me?" she asked softly. Wendell tensed slightly, his gaze shifting away for just a moment, long enough for Rosie to know there was more. "She's been attempting to contact board members," he finally said, "suggesting that my judgment is compromised, that the company needs stronger leadership during this personal crisis. It's nothing, Rosie. Everyone knows Victoria's tactics, but it wasn't nothing. It was a coordinated attack on the life they were building, on the family they were fighting to protect, and Wendell had chosen to shield her from it, to handle it alone, rather than trusting her as a true partner. We can't build a marriage on partial truths, Rosie said quietly, the hurt in her voice making Wendell flinch. I spent 7 years searching for you, raising our son alone, fighting for every scrap of information about the man I loved. I'm not fragile, Wendell. I don't need protection from reality. Regret shadowed his features as he took her hands again. You're right, he acknowledged. I've spent so long handling everything alone, being the sole protector of Prince and the company. Sharing burdens doesn't come naturally to me yet. But I'm trying, Rosie. I want to be the partner you deserve. The sincerity in his voice, the genuine remorse in his eyes, softened Rosie's hurt. "Then promise me, no more secrets, no matter how small. We face everything together, the good and the bad." "I promise," Wendell said solemnly, lifting her hand to press a kiss to the emerald ring that symbolized their commitment. "No more secrets." That night, as they made love with a passionate intensity born of nearly losing what they'd found, Rosie tried to banish the lingering unease Victoria's attack had planted. Wendell worshipped her body with tender devotion, his every touch, every whispered endearment, a counterpoint to the doubts that threatened their happiness. Yet as dawn approached and Wendell slept peacefully beside her, Rosie found herself staring at the ceiling, Victoria's venomous words echoing in her mind, not because they contained any truth, but because they had exposed the fragility of the foundation they were building, a foundation still marred by the scars of past betrayals, still vulnerable to attacks from those who wished them ill. When morning finally arrived, Rosie made a decision. If Victoria wanted a fight, she would get one. Not from Wendell alone, but from both of them, united and unbreakable, because this family, this love they had rediscovered against impossible odds, was worth fighting for with everything they had. She didn't realize, as she watched the sunrise paint the sky in hues of promise, that Victoria's attack was only the opening salvo in a battle that would test their love to its very limits. A battle that would force them to confront not just external threats, but the deepest fears and insecurities they each harbored in the shadowed corners of their hearts. Chapter 9. Fighting for Love. The Taylor Industries annual charity gala transformed the Grand Plaza Hotel into a glittering showcase of wealth and influence. Rosie, radiant in an emerald gown that matched both her engagement ring and her eyes, stood beside Wendell as they entered the ballroom. Despite her outward composure, anxiety fluttered beneath her ribs. This was her first official appearance as Wendell's fiancée, her formal introduction to the world that had once seemed impossibly distant. "You look breathtaking," Wendell whispered, his hand warm at the small of her back. "Every man here will envy me tonight. And every woman will wonder what you see in the former Maid," she countered with a small smile. "Let them wonder," he replied fiercely. "What we have is real. No one can take that from us." The night progressed smoothly until James Harrington, Wendell's lawyer and closest friend, approached Rosie during a quiet moment. "Victoria's here," he murmured, subtly directing her attention across the room. She wasn't invited. Victoria Hargrove stood framed in the doorway like an actress awaiting her cue, breathtakingly beautiful in crimson silk that emphasized her willowy figure. Her calculated gaze swept the room before settling on Wendell with predatory focus. "She can't cause a scene here," James assured her. "Too many witnesses. This is just psychological warfare." "Then she'll be disappointed," Rosie replied, squaring her shoulders. "I've waited 7 years for Wendell and Prince. I won't be intimidated by theatrical entrances." Moments later, Victoria had maneuvered to Wendell's side, one perfectly manicured hand resting possessively on his arm. "Must admit the foundation thrives under your leadership," she was saying as Rosie approached. "Though the board has concerns about recent distractions," Victoria, Wendell acknowledged coolly. "I believe you know my fiancée, Rosie Peake." Victoria's smile never reached her eyes. Of course, the mysterious nanny who so fortuitously appeared with a ready-made heir. How convenient. "Not a nanny," Rosie corrected gently. "Prince's biological mother, as confirmed by DNA testing. But then you've already been briefed on those results by your lawyers, haven't you?" Something dangerous flashed in Victoria's eyes. "DNA can be manipulated," she replied dismissively, "as can vulnerable children and—" Her gaze swept over Wendell. "Men still suffering from trauma-induced memory issues. Before tensions could escalate further, Elegant Mrs. Eleanor Thornton, the society matriarch whose approval was social currency, intercepted them with perfect timing. "Victoria, darling," she said with deceptive warmth, "I had no idea you were on the guest list, especially given your recent actions against the Foundation's chairman." Victoria's composure slipped momentarily. "Eleanor, always so direct. I'm simply concerned about the Foundation's reputation." "How thoughtful," Mrs. Thornton replied dryly, "though your concern might appear more genuine if you hadn't attempted to redirect 3 major donors to your pet project last week. Now, I believe the Miyamotos were hoping to speak with you, Wendell. Victoria and I have some catching up to do." The dismissal was so perfectly executed that even Victoria couldn't protest without appearing petty. As Mrs. Thornton led the fuming ex-wife away, Wendell guided Rosie to a quiet alcove. "Are you all right?" he asked, his eyes searching hers. "I'm fine," Rosie assured him. "But Wendell, she's not going to stop. This is just the beginning." His fingers tightened on her waist. "Let her try. We have truth, evidence, allies she can't match." Yet Rosie couldn't shake the sense they were facing an adversary more dangerous than either acknowledged, a woman willing to use even Prince as ammunition in her campaign. 3 days later, Rosie's premonition proved devastatingly accurate. She was in the garden when Wendell's car came racing up the driveway, gravel spraying beneath screeching tires. One look at his face, white with barely controlled fury, sent ice through her veins. "Victoria happened," he spat, hands clenched into fists. "She showed up at Prince's school claiming custodial rights. When administration refused, she told Prince we've been lying to him, that you're an imposter taking advantage of my mental confusion, that the DNA test was faked." Horror choked Rosie. "Where is he?" "In the car," Wendell replied, visibly struggling to calm himself. "He's confused. Upset. He kept asking for you." Prince sat in the back seat, his small face tear-streaked. His school blazer rumpled. When he saw Rosie, he launched himself from the car into her waiting arms. "She said you weren't my real mom," he sobbed against her neck. "She said you were tricking Daddy, and that she's my real mom, and that you're going to take all our money and leave us." Fury, unlike anything Rosie had ever experienced, surged through her. This attack on their innocent child transformed Victoria from irritating adversary to mortal enemy. "Listen to me," she said fiercely, kneeling to meet Prince's tearful gaze. "I am your mother, by birth, by blood, by choice, and by love. The DNA test proved it scientifically, but you knew it before anyone else, didn't you? You recognized me the moment we met." Prince nodded, hiccuping slightly. "I knew you in my heart, and in my dreams. She never felt like my mother, even when I was little." Wendell knelt beside them, enfolding both in his strong arms. "Victoria is angry and jealous," he explained gently. "She left us years ago because she didn't want to be a mother. Now that she sees our happiness, she wants to destroy it." "But why?" Prince asked, the innocent question cutting to the heart of adult cruelty. "Some people can't bear to see others happy," Rosie finally said. "They want what they can't have, not because they truly desire it, but because they can't stand for anyone else to possess it." Prince considered this with surprising maturity. "She's not going to win," he declared with determination. "We won't let her." "No, we won't," Wendell agreed, meeting Rosie's gaze over their son's head. Victoria's attack on Prince had transformed a social annoyance into a declaration of war. That evening, after Prince had finally fallen asleep, Wendell and Rosie met with James in the study, strategy replacing emotion. "We need a restraining order," James advised. "Victoria's attempt to remove Prince from school gives us grounds. We should also accelerate the wedding. Once you're legally married, Rosie's position as Prince's mother substantially strengthens our case." "What about the company angle?" Wendell asked. "She's been suggesting to board members that I'm mentally unfit for leadership due to trauma-induced delusions about Rosie and Prince." By exposing her true motives, James replied. My investigation shows she's nearly bankrupt. 3 failed. Of ventures, excessive spending, bad investments, she's desperate for cash, explaining the sudden interest in reconciliation and Prince's welfare. We need to go public, Rosie said, clarity dawning. Not with accusations, but with our story. The full truth about how we met, separated, how Prince recognized me, despite never having seen me before. Expose our private history to public scrutiny, Wendell questioned. That feels like giving Victoria exactly what she wants. No, Rosie insisted. What Victoria wants is shadows, doubts, secrets she can manipulate. Our greatest weapon is the truth, a truth so extraordinary that no one could hear it and believe her poisonous version. James nodded. The romance would capture public imagination, generate sympathy. Victoria would appear as the bitter ex trying to destroy a genuine love story. Wendell remained silent, weighing privacy against protecting their family. Finally, he squeezed Rosie's hand. We tell our story, the whole truth on our terms, not for Victoria, not for the board, but for Prince, for the family we've fought so hard to build. The plan took shape quickly. An exclusive interview with a respected journalist, accompanied by irrefutable evidence, medical records from the accident, DNA results, even the photograph that had been Wendell's only connection to Rosie during their years apart. As midnight approached, strategies in place, and battle lines drawn, Rosie and Wendell sought the refuge of their bedroom. Physical and emotional exhaustion consumed them both. Yet as they held each other in the darkness, a different kind of intimacy enveloped them, the bone-deep connection of partners united against a common enemy, of lovers whose bond had been tested and found unbreakable. I'm sorry, Wendell whispered. I never wanted to expose you to this ugliness. Don't apologize for Victoria's actions, Rosie replied fiercely. This fight isn't your burden alone anymore. It's ours. And we will win, Wendell, not just for ourselves, but for Prince. The raw vulnerability in his eyes as he traced her features in the moonlight made her heart ache with love. I don't deserve you, he murmured, but I will spend every day of our lives trying to be worthy of the gift you've given me. What gift? She asked softly. The gift of wholeness, he answered simply. Before you, I was half a man, successful, wealthy, but incomplete. You and Prince, you make me whole. Their lovemaking that night transcended physical pleasure, becoming a sacred affirmation of their bond. Each touch, each whispered endearment became a vow more binding than any legal document. In the sanctuary of their bedroom, they reclaimed what Victoria had tried to tarnish, the pure, unbreakable connection between two souls who had found each other across impossible odds. The interview strategy worked beyond expectations. Their extraordinary love story captured public imagination, generating overwhelming support. Victoria's machinations crumbled in the face of irrefutable evidence and the palpable authenticity of their connection. The final blow came when Victoria's former assistant revealed evidence of her fabrications and financial desperation. Faced with potential legal consequences and complete failure of her schemes, Victoria retreated to Europe, the Taylor Industries Board expressing their unwavering support for Wendell Taylor and his family during this joyous time of reunion. With Victoria's shadow finally lifted, they turned their full attention to the December wedding that would mark not the beginning of their love story, but the triumphant continuation of a connection that had defied time, trauma, and deliberate sabotage to emerge stronger than ever. As the first snow of winter transformed the estate into a crystalline wonderland, Rosie stood at their bedroom window, watching Prince build a snowman below. Wendell's arms encircled her from behind, his chin resting on her shoulder. Happy, he murmured, his breath warm against her neck. Beyond words, she replied, leaning into his strength. I never imagined we could find such perfect peace." Wendell turned her in his arms, his expression infinitely tender as he brushed snowflakes from her hair. "This is just the beginning," he promised softly. "The best is yet to come." Chapter 10. Love Conquers All. Snow fell in gentle spirals outside the Taylor Estate's conservatory, transforming the December landscape into a winter wonderland that seemed conjured from a fairy tale. Inside, thousands of white roses and twinkling lights created an enchanted forest effect that made the glass-enclosed space feel like a realm between worlds. A perfect setting for a love story that had defied time and memory to reach this perfect culmination. Rosie stood before the mirror in what had once been a guest suite, her reflection almost unrecognizable, not because of the exquisite ivory gown that hugged her curves before flowing into a delicate train, but because of the luminous joy that transformed her features into something transcendent. Gone was the haunted look of longing that had shadowed her eyes for 7 years. In its place shone a happiness so complete it seemed to glow from within. "You look like an angel," came Prince's voice from the doorway. He stood in his miniature tuxedo, looking so much like a smaller version of Wendell that Rosie's heart clenched. "With love for them both. The most beautiful angel I've ever seen," added Mrs. Jenkins, entering behind Prince with uncharacteristic tears glistening in her eyes. "Mr. Taylor asked me to bring you this." She handed Rosie a cream-colored envelope, bearing Wendell's distinctive handwriting. Inside was a note written in his bold, confident script. "My dearest Rosie, 7 years ago you pulled me from flames and into your life, giving me a night of perfection I couldn't remember but never truly forgot. Today I stand ready to offer you forever in return. Not because you saved my life, not because you gave me our beautiful son, but because loving you is as essential to me as breathing. Every heartbeat carries your name, every dream holds your face. When you walk down the aisle to me today, know that you're walking to a man who will spend eternity cherishing the miracle that brought you back to me across impossible odds. With all that I am, Wendell." Tears spilled down Rosie's cheeks as she pressed the letter to her heart. Mrs. Jenkins discreetly handed her a handkerchief, while Prince watched with solemn understanding beyond his years. "Dad cried when he wrote that," Prince informed her matter-of-factly. "He didn't know I saw, but he did, and he asked me to give you this too." From his pocket, Prince produced a small velvet box. Inside nestled an antique sapphire pendant on a delicate platinum chain, the stones exactly matching the blue of Rosie and Prince's eyes. "It was great-grandmother Taylor's," Prince explained as Rosie gasped. "Dad said she made him promise it. Would only be worn by his true love on their wedding day. He kept it all these years without knowing who it was waiting for." With reverent care, Prince fastened the pendant around Rosie's neck, the weight of family history and future promise settling against her skin like a blessing. "Now you're really part of us," Prince declared with absolute certainty. "Forever and always." The music that drifted up from the conservatory below wasn't the traditional wedding march, but a hauntingly beautiful arrangement of the lullaby Rosie had sung to Prince on the stormy night when Wendell's memories had begun to return. Taking Prince's outstretched hand, Rosie descended the grand staircase, each step carrying her closer to the future she had dreamed of for so long. The gathered guests, a select group of those who had supported their extraordinary journey, rose as Rosie appeared at the entrance to the conservatory, but she saw none of them. Her gaze locked immediately with Wendell's, standing tall and impossibly handsome at the end of the petal-strewn aisle. The naked emotion on his face, wonder, devotion, and bone-deep love, stole her breath more effectively than any corset could have done. With Prince's small hand warm in hers, Rosie moved toward Wendell in a dreamlike state, tears of joy blurring her vision. When they reached him, Prince placed her hand in his father's with ceremonial gravity before moving to stand between them, completing their family circle as the officiant began the ceremony. They had written their own vows, traditional words seeming inadequate for the extraordinary path that had led them here. "Rosie," Wendell began, his deep voice steady despite the emotion shining in his eyes, "I stand before you today not as the man who forgot, but as the man who found his way back to you, despite every obstacle fate placed between us. You saved me twice, first from fire, then from a life half-lived without the love you awakened in me. I vow to cherish every moment of our shared future, to honor the miracle of our connection, to be the husband and father our family deserves. My heart recognized yours before my mind remembered your face, proof that some bonds transcend memory itself. I am yours, completely, irrevocably, eternally." Tears flowed freely down Rosie's cheeks as she spoke her answering vows, her voice clear, despite the emotion tightening her throat. "Wendell, 7 years ago, a storm brought us together for a night that changed everything. When dawn separated us, I carried you with me, in my heart, in my dreams, in our beautiful son. Finding you again felt like finding the missing piece of my soul. The completion of a circle destiny had momentarily broken. I vow to stand by you through whatever storms life brings, to love you with the same certainty that guided me back to you, to build with you the family we were always meant to be. Some souls are bound by ties stronger than time or circumstance, and ours will remain entwined in this life and beyond." As they exchanged rings, Rosie's a platinum band studded with tiny emeralds that matched her engagement ring, Wendell's engraved with their initials and the date of that first fateful night. Prince beamed between them, the physical embodiment of their love. "By the power vested in me," the officiant concluded, "I now pronounce you husband and wife." Wendell didn't wait for permission to kiss his bride. He gathered Rosie into his arms with passionate intensity, his lips claiming hers in a kiss that spoke of promises kept and pleasures to come. The conservatory erupted in applause, but for Rosie and Wendell, the world had narrowed to just the three of them, husband, wife, and the child who had somehow known what neither of them could remember. The celebration that followed was intimate, yet joyous. Close friends and loyal staff united in celebration of a love that had overcome every obstacle in its path. As their first dance ended, Wendell kept Rosie close in his arms, reluctant to release her, even as other couples joined them on the dance floor. "Happy," he murmured against her temple, his breath warm against her skin. "Beyond anything I could have imagined," she replied, nestling closer against the solid strength of his chest. "Sometimes I'm afraid I'll wake up and discover this has all been a beautiful dream." "Not a dream," Wendell promised, his voice dropping to the register that never failed to send delicious shivers down her spine. "And I intend to spend tonight, and every night for the rest of our lives, proving just how real this is." The heat in his eyes made promises that set Rosie's blood aflame, but before she could respond, Prince appeared beside them, practically vibrating with excitement. "Can we tell them now?" he pleaded, bouncing on his toes. "Please, it's killing me to keep the secret." Wendell laughed, the sound rich with happiness as he nodded to the band to pause their music. With one arm firmly around Rosie's waist and the other drawing Prince before them, he addressed their gathered loved ones. "Friends," he began, his voice carrying easily through the conservatory. "Family, because that's what each of you has become through your support. Rosie and I have an announcement, one that Prince has been guarding with remarkable restraint these past 2 weeks. With a theatrical flourish worthy of his father, Prince proclaimed to the hushed gathering, 'I'm going to be a big brother in summer. Mum says the baby was made from so much love that it couldn't help but happen. As delighted congratulations surrounded them, Wendell drew Rosie into the shelter of his arms, his hand moving protectively to cover her still flat stomach, where their second miracle grew. "He's exactly right," he whispered against her ear, his voice rough with emotion. "This childlike prince was created from a love powerful enough to overcome even time itself." Later, as the celebration continued around them, Wendell led Rosie to a quiet corner of the conservatory, his expression holding a hint of boyish excitement she had come to cherish. "I have one more wedding gift for you," he said, pressing a key into her palm. "I've purchased the cottage where we first met, where you pulled me from the fire, where Prince was conceived. I've had it restored exactly as it was that night, with just one addition." "What addition?" Rosie asked, her heart swelling with love for this man who understood so perfectly what would mean most to her. "A nursery," he said softly, his hands framing her face with tender reverence. "For our growing family. I thought our children should know where their story began, where two souls found each other against impossible odds." Words failed Rosie completely. Instead, she rose on her toes to press her lips to his, pouring all her love, all her gratitude, into a kiss that quickly deepened into something more primal, more urgent. Only the knowledge of their guests nearby prevented them from being completely lost in each other. "Tonight," Wendell promised against her lips, his eyes dark with desire, "tonight I'll show you exactly how much I love you, and every night after," Rosie whispered back, her body already responding to the promise in his gaze. As midnight approached and the celebration began to wind down, Rosie stood with Wendell beside the sleeping form of their son, who had finally succumbed to exhaustion on a cushioned window seat. In peaceful slumber, Prince's face reflected the perfect blending of their features, Wendell's strong jaw and aristocratic nose, Rosie's sapphire eyes and expressive mouth. "Look at what we created," Wendell said softly, his arm warm around Rosie's. "You waste. Look at what almost never was, if not for your courage in finding us again." "It was always meant to be," Rosie replied with quiet certainty. "Some connections are written in the stars, Wendell. Ours just took a more winding path than most." As if confirming her words, a shooting star streaked across the winter sky beyond the glass walls of the conservatory, a fleeting streak of brilliance. Against the darkness, Wendell's arms tightened around her, his lips finding the sensitive spot behind her ear that never failed to make her melt against him. "Shall we put our son to bed?" he murmured, his voice a seductive caress, "and begin our wedding night properly? I've waited 7 years to make love to my wife." The way he said wife, with possessive pride and heated promise, sent anticipation curling through Rosie's body. As they carried their sleeping son to his room, as they bid farewell to the last lingering guests, a sense of perfect rightness settled over her. This was what completion felt like, this certainty, this belonging, this absolute knowledge of being precisely where she was meant to be. Later, in the privacy of their bedroom, surrounded by hundreds of candles that transformed their space into a sanctuary of golden light, Wendell made good on every unspoken promise. Their lovemaking transcended mere physical pleasure, becoming instead a communion of souls, finally, completely united. "Mine," Wendell whispered against her skin as they moved together in perfect harmony. "Forever mine." "Yours," Rosie agreed breathlessly, her hands mapping the contours of the body she would spend a lifetime cherishing. "Always yours." When dawn painted the winter sky in delicate hues of pink and gold, they lay entwined, reluctant to break contact even in sleep. Wendell's hand rested protectively over the place where their second child grew, while Rosie's head nestled in the hollow of his shoulder as if shaped specifically for that purpose. As Rosie drifted in that peaceful space between slumber and waking, She felt gratitude so profound it brought fresh tears to her eyes. 7 years of separation, of longing, of raising her child alone while believing the man she loved would never remember her. All leading to this perfect moment of completion. Their extraordinary journey had only just begun. There would be more children to love, more memories to create, more challenges to face together. But with the unbreakable foundation of a love strong enough to overcome amnesia, separation, and deliberate sabotage, Rosie knew with bone-deep certainty that nothing would ever truly separate them again. Some souls, after all, were simply destined to find each other in this life and beyond.